Well, I'm just sitting here in my living room enjoying the flavor and quality of a good electronic cigarette. Why am I waving around an electronic cigarette? I'll tell you why. Because this electronic cigarette will end up being a metaphor, an analogy, a symbol, if you will, of the thing that I'm actually here to talk about tonight. The interpersonal relationship. I'm just going to put this away. But we'll come back to it in the conclusion, I promise. So yes, the purpose of tonight is to continue the conversation that we've already started about the nature of interpersonal communications as it exists within the context of symbolic interaction. How people create the dyadic interpersonal relationship, the dyad between two people. I've already started this conversation, and there's not a lot of reason to go back over it. The reason that I feel any urgency to go back over it at all is that the book content, the content from the textbook, here it is. I'm sure you recognize it, most of you. But on the other hand, here's some parts that you're not as familiar with. This is the inside of the textbook, which you would only have had an opportunity to look at had you opened the textbook at any point before tonight. In the inside of the textbook, specifically Chapter 8, you find that there are at least a couple, there are 2 or 3 models of the development of interpersonal relationships that break it down into steps. There's the NAP model, and then there's what's called the turning point model, which basically look at it pyramidally the same way, but with different terms. Well, I decided that you can read the textbook, but that it would be of benefit for me to talk about the overall content and stresses and challenges and the nature for the individuals involved of the broad sets of steps that are represented in those models. My plan is to take the overall conversation that we're going to have tonight and break it down into smaller segments so that nobody has to sit through however long this is going to take in one sitting or have to pause or do anything like that. So here's the way it's going to work. I'm taking the 10 or 11 or 12 step models that are already discussed in the textbook, combining them, and then breaking them down into 5 sets of interpersonal steps that relate to the dynamics of dyadic relationships in the world of symbolic interaction. And then I will make a separate video for each of those 5 steps, and probably a smaller separate video in the conclusion. Also, I will have this video that you're looking at right now just to set things up. I think a bunch of smaller elements might be better than trying to throw the whole thing into one big pot. Every once in a while, I'm going to look over like that. That's because my laptop's sitting over there, and every once in a while, I'm going to want to look at some notes. So don't worry about that. At any rate, let me go over the 5 sets, 6 sets actually of things that we're going to talk about. I mentioned 5 because the first one we've already pretty much discussed, and I'm just going to give you a global overview of that. So the way that I would break the development of interpersonal relationships down is into these 5 steps. They are, in order, meet, entreat, complete, discrete, compete, and defeat. My personal favorite. Again, the meet model, that's M-E-T by the way, it constitutes stuff that we've already talked about. That's the stuff that's involved in what we refer to as interpersonal attraction, and getting rid of doubts about what's going on so that you can start the interpersonal relationship. That's the first thing that we're going to talk about in general steps, and I'm just going to go over it very quickly. because we've already talked about that. And then after this, I will start with the entreat model, and then we'll work through each of the 5 and discuss the general developments of those. And that's it. That's the plan. So go back with me for a second to the stuff that we've already talked about. And the best way to do that is to focus on that visual metaphor that I used in class. And if I have any luck figuring how to do so, is taking over my picture right now and appearing on this video to remind you. That's the model of the molecule. I want you to think about interpersonal relationships as a molecule. Now, what's the difference between a molecule and just a pair of things? Well, as we talked about in class, when a pair of things get together and operate cooperatively, that's one kind of phenomenon. But that's not what happens when a molecule forms. When a molecule forms, there is a bonding of the fact that the actual content of each of the parts of that molecule literally are shared by both. The molecule becomes something different than the content and nature of the individual things that created it. It has capabilities that those things don't have. It has limitations that those things don't have. And that's the way that we want to think about an interpersonal dyadic relationship. As I talked about, the dyadic relationship actually becomes a phenomenon that contains and includes the individuals involved, but becomes something bigger and different and special as those two individuals interact symbolically within the confines and in the process of defining and defending that interpersonal relationship. So that's what we're going to talk about. In terms of the first step, meet. Obviously, for the two individuals to be in a position to form a dyadic relationship, they have to have an original conversation. They have to end up in the same place at the same time. We defined the concept of attraction in our class as not necessarily being attracted to somebody the way that we talk about it, although that was part of it. We defined attraction as the urgency to have an interaction with that person for the sole purpose of having interacted. In other words, you are attracted to communicating with that person not because of an instrumental outcome, not because there's information you need from them or a service that you wish to acquire, but simply because interacting with that person on its own seems like a good idea. So you interact with that person. You try to generate common ground based on content. And then that common ground based on content evolves into common ground based on maybe prior assumptions about the way things are, opinions and attitudes, and presumptions about the appropriateness of the way things happen and the way people interact with each other. Again, this is all review, and it's all fascinating stuff, but it's fascinating stuff that we've already been through. That's the meet stage. The meet, M-E-E-T stage, otherwise write your own punchline, is the stage at which two individuals see a potential future for engaging themselves more formally, just again within the context of interaction. So, that's all of part one. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to load out this video, and then I'm going to set you up for the next one. So, I'll see you again in a matter of minutes. I don't know what the time frame will be for you, but at any rate, see you soon.